SEC football in the digital age, the consensus of All-Americans. 8 SEC players are members of the 2021 NCAA FBS Consensus All-American team. The NCAA currently compiles a definitive All-American squad for its annual record book from the choices of 5 selectors: the American Football Coaches Association, Associated Press, Football Writers Association of America, Sporting News, and Walter Camp Football Foundation. Players become consensus All-Americans by earning first-team recognition from at least 3 of the selectors. It's also possible for a player to be a consensus All-American without making 3 teams if not enough players to fill the consensus team meet that threshold. Some numbers about the SEC consensus All-Americans. 1 All-American selector kept Kentucky OT Darian Kinnard and Alabama OT Evan Neal from achieving unanimous All-American status. For Kinnard, the selector was the Sporting News, which left him off the first team in favor of Mississippi State OT Charles Cross. For Neal, the selector was the Associated Press, which had Kinnard and North Carolina State's Ikem Ekwonu as its first-team offensive tackles. The Sporting News selected Ekwonu as a guard and had Neal and Cross as its first-team tackles. More SEC football. Times Lane Kiffin on transfer portal. They are going where they are going to get paid the most. Times Spencer Rattler announces his transferring to South Carolina. Times Mike Leach blasts players for opting out of bowls. 2 of the 5 consensus All-American selectors did not have Alabama's Bryce Young as their first-team quarterback, even though he won the Heisman Trophy. Pittsburgh's Kenny Pickett was the first-team choice at quarterback on the All-American team selected by the Walter Camp Football Foundation and the American Football Coaches Association. 2 of the SEC's 8 consensus All-Americans in 2021 earned the recognition even though they received first-team recognition from 2 selectors apiece. Texas A&M OL Kenyon Green and DL DeMarvin Leal were first-team selections by the AP and Sporting News. The other 3 consensus selections had the Aggies on their second teams. Among offensive linemen, North Carolina State's Ikem Ekwonu and Iowa's Tyler Linderbaum were unanimous selections, and Kentucky's Darian Kinnard and Alabama's Evan Neal were first-team picks for 4 of the selectors. The other 7 first-team offensive line selections went to 5 players, with Green and Boston College's Zion Johnson getting 2 first-team selections apiece to tie for the final offensive line spot on the consensus team. Among defensive linemen, Georgia's Jordan Davis, Michigan's Aiden Hutchinson, and Oregon's Kayvon Thibodeau were unanimous selections. The other first-team spots on the All-American teams chosen by consensus selectors went to 4 players, with Leal the only one appearing twice. 3 seconds players are unanimous All-Americans for the 2021 season: Alabama Pound Will Anderson Jr., Georgia DL Jordan Davis, and Georgia Pound Nakobe Dean. Unanimous All-Americans are first-team choices of all 5 of the selectors used by the NCAA to assemble the consensus squad. 4 consecutive consensus All-American teams have featured in SEC quarterback, with Alabama's Bryce Young earning the honor this season. Young follows Alabama's Tua Tagovailoa in 2018, LSU's Joe Burrow in 2019, and Alabama's Mac Jones in 2020 as the consensus All-American quarterback. 9 other SEC players have been the consensus All-American QB: Auburn's Pat Sullivan in 1971, LSU's Burt Jones in 1972, Florida's Danny Wuerffel in 1996, Tennessee's Peyton Manning in 1997, Kentucky's Tim Couch in 1998, Florida's Rex Grossman in 2001, Florida's Tim Tebow in 2007, Auburn's Cam Newton in 2010, and Texas A&M's Johnny Manziel in 2012. Florida QB Steve Spurrier was a consensus All-American in 1966 when the team featured 4 players designated only as backs. Other consensus All-Americans from the SEC, such as Ole Miss Charlie Conley in 1947, have played the equivalent of the QB position in college but been designated as halfbacks or tailbacks in a single wing-type offense and were All-American selections as backs. 4 seconds players were selected as third-team All-Americans by the Associated Press this season. While each of the 5 consensus selectors chooses a second team, only the AP has a third team. SEC players on the third unit in 2021 were Alabama S Jordan Battle, Georgia S Lewis Cine, Missouri C Michael Maietti, and Ole Miss D Sam Williams. 5 seconds players were tabbed as first-team All-Americans by at least one of the major selectors without earning consensus recognition. In 2021, Georgia S Lewis Cine earned first-team selection by the Sporting News, Mississippi State OT Charles Cross earned first-team selection by the Sporting News, Auburn CB Roger McCreary earned first-team selection by the Associated Press, Missouri K Harrison Mevis earned first-team selection by the Sporting News, and Alabama W.R. Jameson Williams earned first-team selection by the AP and the Sporting News. 5 Kentucky linemen have been consensus All-Americans, with OT Darian Kinnard joining the list this season. The other Kentucky linemen who have been consensus All-Americans include T. Bob Gain in 1950, T. Lou Michaels in 1956 and 1957, T. Sam Ball in 1965, and D. L. Art Still in 1977. Kinnard is the 12th Kentucky player to receive consensus All-American recognition. 8 seconds players earned consensus All-American recognition for the 2021 season: Alabama Pound pound Will Anderson Jr., OT Evan Neal and QB Bryce Young, Georgia DL Jordan Davis and pound Nakobe Dean, Kentucky OT Darian Kinnard and Texas A&M OL Kenyon Green and DL DeMarvin Leal. 11 consensus All-Americans with a position designation of pound for linebacker have been produced by Alabama since the AP first included offensive and defensive teams in its selection in 1965, including Will Anderson Jr. this season. Alabama's other consensus All-American linebackers have been Woodrow Lowe in 1974, Cornelius Bennett in 1986, Derek Thomas in 1988, Keith McCants in 1989, D'Amico Ryans in 2005, Rolando McClain in 2009, Donta Hightower in 2011, C.J. Mosley in 2012 and 2013. Reggie Ragland in 2015 and Reuben Foster in 2016. 11 Georgia players have been unanimous All-American selections, with DL Jordan Davis and pound Nakobe Dean joining the list this season. The Bulldogs' other unanimous All-Americans have been B. Frank Sinkwich in 1942, B. Charlie Trippi in 1946, G. Royce Smith in 1971, R.B. Herschel Walker in 1980, 1981 and 1982, R.B. Garrison Hurst in 1992, P. Drew Butler in 2009, pound Jarvis Jones in 2012. Pound Roquan Smith in 2017 and OT Andrew Thomas in 2019. Overall, Georgia players have been selected as consensus All-Americans 37 times. 17 seconds players were tabbed as second-team All-Americans by the consensus selectors in 2021. Each of the consensus selectors has a second team. The SEC players chosen as second-teamers included Alabama W.R. Jameson Williams, Georgia O.L. Jamari Salyer, Missouri R.B. Tyler Batty and Texas A&M O.L. Kenyon Green and D.L. DeMarvin Leal by 3 selectors apiece. Alabama QB Bryce Young, LSU pound Damone Clark and Ole Miss D.E. Sam Williams by 2 selectors each and Alabama S. Jordan Battle, DL for Darian Mathis and OT Evan Neal. Georgia T. Brock Bowers, D.E. Jalen Carter, pound Key Walker and D.T. Devontae Wyatt, Kentucky OT Darian Kinnard and South Carolina CB. Jalen Foster by 1 selector apiece. 19 consensus All-Americans with a position designation in the offensive line have been produced by Alabama since the AP first included offensive and defensive teams in its selection in 1965, including OT Evan Neal this season. Alabama's other consensus All-American offensive linemen since 1965 have been Paul Crane in 1965, Cecil Dowdy in 1966, John Hanna in 1972, Buddy Brown in 1973, Jim Bunch in 1979, Chris Samuels in 1999, Antoine Caldwell and Andre Smith in 2008, Mike Johnson in 2009, Barrett Jones in 2011, Jones and Chance Warmack in 2012, Cyrus Kouangio in 2013, Ryan Kelly in 2015, Cam Robinson in 2016, Jonah Williams in 2018 and Landon Dickerson and Alex Leatherwood in 2020. 19 years since the previous time the SEC failed to produce a consensus All-American at defensive back. Before 2021, the most recent season without a consensus All-American defensive back from the SEC was 2002. During the 18 consecutive seasons with at least one consensus All-American defensive back from the SEC, 32 DBS from the conference received recognition. The conference's consensus All-American DBS in the streak were Florida's Kewan Ratliff in 2003, Auburn's Carlos Rogers and Georgia's Thomas Davis in 2004, Georgia's Greg Blue in 2005, Florida's Reggie Nelson and LSU's Laren Landry in 2006, LSU's Craig Steltz in 2007, Tennessee's Eric Berry in 2008, Alabama's Javier Arenas, Florida's Joe Hayden and Berry in 2009, LSU's Patrick Peterson in 2010, Alabama's Mark Barron and LSU's Morris Claiborne and Tyrann Mathieu in 2011, Alabama's D. Milliner and LSU's Eric Reed in 2012, Alabama's Ha Clinton-Dix in 2013, Alabama's Landon Collins and Ole Miss Senquez Golson in 2014, Florida's Vernon Hargreaves III in 2015, Alabama's Minka Fitzpatrick and LSU's Tre'Davious White in 2016, Fitzpatrick in 2017, Alabama's Deontay Thompson, Georgia's DeAndre Baker and LSU's Grant Delpit and Greedy Williams in 2018, Georgia's J.R. Reed and LSU's Delpit and Derek Stingley Jr. in 2019 and Alabama's Patrick Surtain II in 2020. 21 years since Mississippi State had a consensus All-American, the longest drought in the SEC. DB Fred Smoot in 2000 is the Bulldogs' most recent consensus All-American. Only one other Mississippi State player has been a consensus All-American, DL Jimmy Webb in 1974. 29 seconds players have been consensus All-Americans more than once, with Texas A&M OL Kenyon Green joining the list this season. The SEC's other multiple consensus All-Americans have been Alabama D.E. Leroy Cook in 1974-75, D.T. Terrence Cody in 2008-2009, O.L. Barrett Jones in 2011-12, Pound C.J. Mosley in 2012-13 and S. Minka Fitzpatrick in 2016-17. Arkansas OL Sean Andrews in 2002-2003 and RB Darren McFadden in 2006-2007, Auburn RB Bo Jackson in 1983 and 1985 and Diddy Tracy Rocker in 1987-88, Florida Pound Wilbur Marshall in 1982-83 and Pound Brandon Spikes in 2008-2009. Georgia HB Frank Sinkwich in 1941-42, RB Herschel Walker in 1980-82, DB Terry Hoage in 1982-83, DE David Pollock in 2002 and 2004 and Pound Jarvis Jones in 2011-12, Kentucky QB Babe Parilli in 1950-51 and T. Lou Michaels in 1956-57, LSU E. Gaynor Tinsley in 1935-36, HB Billy Cannon in 1958-59. DB Tommy Casanova in 1970-71, RB Charles Alexander in 1977-78 and S. Grant Delpit in 2018-19 and Tennessee Pound Steve Kiner in 1968-69, G. Chip Cull in 1969-70, E. Larry Severs in 1975-76. DL John Henderson in 2000-2001 and S. Eric Berry in 2008-2009. 40 unanimous All-American selections for Alabama players, with Pound Will Anderson Jr. joining the list this season. The Crimson Tide has produced more unanimous All-Americans than any other program. 46 years since the previous time that a Texas A&M player has earned consensus All-American recognition in consecutive seasons, as Aggies OL Kenyon Green has in 2020 and 2021. Green joins B. John Kimbrough in 1939 and 1940 and DB Pat Thomas in 1974 and 1975 as Texas A&M's only two-time consensus All-Americans. The Aggies have produced 33 consensus All-American selections, including 10 since joining the SEC in 2012. In addition to Green, DeMarvin Leal also was a consensus All-American selection in 2021. 58 consecutive seasons with at least one consensus All-American from the SEC. The conference was shut out in 1963. The SEC, which played its first football season in 1933, also didn't have any consensus All-Americans in 1943, 1948, 1949 and 1955. 78 Alabama players have been selected as consensus All-Americans, with Pound Will Anderson Jr., OT Evan Neal and QB Bryce Young joining the list this season. With 90 consensus All-Americans, Notre Dame is the only program with more. For more of all.com's comprehensive coverage of the SEC, go to our SEC page. Mark Anabanet is a sports reporter for Alabama Media Group. Follow him on Twitter at @AMarkG1.